everyone.
Hello.
I think there are a lot of folks joining in from different locations. Hi, yes. Hi, Jayant. Hi, Vishali. A lot of people over here. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time here. Yes. Hello from Germany. I see you, Dominic.
Nice.
All right, folks. I think we're good to start here. So, would like to say a warm hello and welcome to all of you who are joined here. This is the day 3 of TestMu Conference 2023. I am Himanshu, your host for this session, and we will be talking about testing serverless applications in AWS. So let me get started by introducing you all to our speaker for today, who is Anaïs van Asselt. So Anaïs is an automation engineer, a coach, and an enthusiast. With a decade of experience in various organizations and a range of tooling, she's a true testing maven. She's all about sustainable test automation, using a context-driven approach, and even drawing inspiration from Bruce Lee for her Bruce Lee-driven development philosophy. Currently, she's working with Choco as a senior QA engineer and helping them scale with their testing efforts. Now, in this session, Anai will be sharing her valuable insights on startups and the impact that they have on quality and test automation. You'll explore the challenges of testing automation in a serverless setup on AWS, and towards the end of the session, you'll gain a deep understanding of testing AWS serverless functions, workflows, and applications. Now, a quick heads up before we begin, a few suggestions to all of our attendees. This session is being recorded, so in case you might need to drop off midway, you'll be able to rewatch the entire session from the TestMe event by going to the schedule. We'll all having a dedicated Q&A round towards the end. So feel free to address any questions during the session in the Q&A window on the right side of the screen. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Anaïs van Asselt and let's get started. Over to you, Anaïs.
Thank you so much, Himanshu. Hello to everyone around the world. And that's like a lot of countries and places that I saw. I will start with sharing my screen. Great. Okay, let's get it started. So what's the impact of serverless applications on quality and test automation? How can you test a serverless architecture on multiple levels? And is it all about rainbows and unicorns? At the end of the session, you will know what rainbows in this story you want to chase. And serverless testing and serverless architecture is a very hot topic, and it's in active development, in so much active development that I've been changing this presentation until like 30 minutes ago. So you are in for a scoop. After my introduction, I will first set the context of the story, introducing serverless and AWS, and then by explaining the creating an order via Choco, that will be like the common user flow and the common thread to explain the complexity of serverless applications, what to test on what level, but also to talk about testing locally versus testing in the cloud. I will conclude with some learnings, and then at the end there's time for some Q&A. My name is Anaïs. Himanshu already told a lot about me. I'm a QA engineer with a passion for test automation, and throughout the years I gained a lot of perspective at different corporations, both government and private. And I've been automating tests in both front-end web and back-end applications. And Himanshu told you something about Bruce Lee-driven development. So what is that? So obviously, all of you know about Bruce Lee, the Kung Fu artist, the Kung Fu master of all time. And the reason why he was such a master is that he started actually his own martial art. He took all of the best traits from different flavors of Kung Fu, adapted it, made his own technique and unique version that suited him best. And that's something that I'm trying to do with QA and test automation as well. So I am from the Netherlands. I actually settled down in Utrecht in the Netherlands with my partner at the end of 2021. And I loved my job at the time. I worked at the Port of Rotterdam via the testers, and I was fully focused on test automation until I received a LinkedIn message starting with this sentence: join us in our mission to reduce food waste. And this sentence changed everything. It got us to move to Berlin in 2022 so that I could join this mission at a startup called Choco. And Choco brings restaurants and their suppliers together on a digital platform. Ordering goods becomes as easy as a chat, and by optimizing order management process, they can make it transparent, and in that way, customers can save time, money, and ultimately reduce food waste. So we changed this rainbow to the startup in Berlin. And my move, I'm sorry, am I still? Yeah, I was afraid I was not sharing anymore, but my move to Berlin was not just a physical one, but one to the other side of different spectra. So previously, via the testers, I was assigned to Port of Rotterdam, and it was a big corporation heavily influenced by the government. And I was a tester for a team working with a team full of all Dutch people, mostly living near the harbor. And the company, the corporation, was mature in multiple senses. It had mature testing process, lots of quality gates, and multiple stakeholders as gatekeepers. And actually, I was one of the youngest persons within that department. And Port of Rotterdam was really focused on long-term goals, with the common pitfall that making decisions can take some time. There are lots of stakeholders to take into account, processes to go through, etc. Then going to startup at Choco, where I started as a tester for 2 product teams last year. And immediately I noticed a great diversity. None of my team members had the same nationality, and it was young in multiple senses. None of my teammates actually worked with a tester before. Sometimes I even had to explain that QA stands for quality assurance. And suddenly I was one of the oldest, which was quite a shock, you can imagine. And Choco is mostly focused on short-term goals. There's really a need for speed, a need for agility, lots of freedom. Don't ask for permission, but ask for forgiveness later. And the impact on quality is that with ad hoc development comes ad hoc testing. And the common pitfall here is that quality is an afterthought. Test automation has to be quickly set up and really easy. And so if it is like quickly and easy set up, doesn't mean that it is the most sustainable solution. So both have their pros and cons. But also on a technical level, I experienced a big change. At the harbor and previous companies, I've always worked in a server-based environment. Thinking like I've been working with Java and Spring Boot applications in microservices architectures, and sometimes they were quite complex architectures, but it was always straightforward. Everything on the server has to be tested. So for an API test of this service on the test, just spin up the application locally with Spring Boot and you can start testing. And how did I do this kind of test? I mocked out the external dependencies using test containers, for example, to programmatically start a container with an Oracle database for test. And WireMock helped me to intercept calls to an external API, verifying those calls and returning mocked responses. So it was quite a focus on local testing and mocking, and it became actually my preference because you can test everything in isolation, you get fast feedback as soon as possible on the service under test. Then going to Choco, I suddenly went into an environment with all serverless applications, with AWS as our cloud provider. But what actually is this difference between serverless and server-based? And do we also see a focus on local testing and mocking? Serverless doesn't mean no servers. It actually means that you can worry about a server less, because they are managed by a cloud provider, and our cloud provider is AWS. And within AWS, you can see there are lots of services available, and you can get easily overwhelmed. So I will just highlight a couple of them to get a better feeling of what AWS and what the services are. Starting with the notorious AWS Lambda, the serverless function, which actually means that when it doesn't compute something, it's using no resources at all. It's only executed when invoked by an environment, which means that it is a really good fit for event-driven architectures. Services in the application integration column that you see here enable such an event-driven architecture. And by messages on a topic, orchestration of whole workflows, asynchronous processes can be managed. DynamoDB is the AWS database type that we use. Then we use Open Search Engine as a service to index our data with Elasticsearch on the background, which enables a quick and easy web search. Then finally, we have our S3 buckets for object storage like pictures, media, those kind of things. What do we actually find at the end of this services rainbow? Serverless applications depend on this rainbow of services, which means that there are two parts impacting behavior of a serverless application, which is the application code and the magical AWS cloud. Imagine an order being created via the Choco application. It ultimately results in an order event on an SNS topic, which is an asynchronous process, and triggers the Lambda when it's ready to process the order, then ultimately saving an order record to the database. And just as a disclaimer, this user flow is overly simplified to hopefully keep it as simple as possible for you. So if we look at the application side of this order flow, zooming into the create order Lambda, we see some code specific for the context and the business. It starts with the Lambda being triggered by the order event. First, this event has to be parsed. It has to be validated. If everything is okay, the event will be processed and converted into an order that fits in a database and can be used for other processes. And all of these small functionalities, these calculations are nitty-gritty things that can be beautifully covered by unit test. So if we look at the other side, the unicorn side, what actually is this magic in the AWS cloud? Everything starts with an AWS account, and an AWS account acts like a container for AWS services and provides a useful level of isolation regarding access and security. And in this way, we can separate environments really well, like test, staging, and production. Those are the test accounts that we mostly have. Then within this AWS account, we have a stack per service. So we have the order service stack here. And the stack is a collection of AWS services that can be managed and deployed as a single unit, just like the order service. So when an order is done on the test environment of the Choco app, it will be processed in the order service stack of this test environment. In this test environment, the infrastructure of these services is black boxed. All of the input-output logic can be correct in the Lambda, but if the SNS topic is misconfigured, the Lambda is never triggered. and all of the configuration can be okay, but what if the message on the topic exceeds the file size? Then it won't be processed by the Lambda to start with. Then if we look at business and domain logic, everything can be 100% tested, but if the Lambda doesn't have any permission right to the database, no order will be created. So all of these examples that I gave are common infrastructure problems that only surface in the cloud: configuration, performance, and security problems. And this actually means that we can only cover this using integration or end-to-end tests. So what do we want to test here? We want to test the integration of our application code and the AWS cloud services that are used in the flow, preferably on an environment that resembles production. But this wish presents a couple of challenges, because like how I showed you how to spin up this Java Spring Boot application really easily, that's not how you spin up an application which is using an AWS service. The only way to use AWS services locally is to simulate or emulate them. And it's actually quite hard to do this. I will show you this in an example later on. And our serverless applications can also feature event-driven and asynchronous workflows, just like I showed you with this NS event. And it's quite difficult actually to get full control over these asynchronous flows. Think about flakiness, race conditions, those kind of things. And all of these challenges result into the fact that we only have unit and end-to-end tests in place at this moment within Choco. So let's take a look at these end-to-end tests. So an end-to-end test verifies a flow in the context of our backend, and we execute those tests on staging, which means that real services are used with these tests, real services and real data. And this means obviously a high confidence, but this high confidence also comes with a price. Because with every dependency, the duration and the chance of flakiness increases. And these tests being executed on staging means that the changes are already merged to master. So when a test is failing, our master is broken, it will conflict with other developers. If a fix has to be created, a new branch has to be created, a new solution, it has to be tested, merged. So a fix is quite expensive, right? So I wanted to find this missing link. So I chased the rainbow to find this missing link between unit and end-to-end testing. And obviously, I started with my wish for local testing and mocking, which is my absolute favorite. But unfortunately, I found more cons than pros, actually. Earlier, I mentioned that it's quite difficult to emulate and simulate these AWS services. There are some tools available to do that, like local stack, for example. But it can be quite difficult to set up and maintain, just to achieve this parity with your own environment. This also means that we can't test our infrastructure configuration. So security, policies, those kind of things we can't test. So it actually gives unrealistic feedback after all that effort. There can be some subtle behavior differences between emulators and the real AWS service. So there is no guarantee, and it can create this false sense of trust. And actually, cloud testing seems way more feasible. And because we are working serverless, a lot around these environments and services is already taken care of by the cloud and the cloud provider. So why not easily spin up everything? Every developer can have their isolated environment. Deploying can take some time, but there are some great tools to synchronize and speed up this process of testing. Mocking is not really recommended, only if a service is not stable or too expensive. And as a fan of local testing, I was actually shocked to find this outcome. And also it seemed at some point that testing in the cloud was not that possible for us, because we were not able to easy and cheaply spin up all of our services, because some services were really expensive. So we had to find some way in between. Can't we combine like both of the two so that the rainbow can meet in middle? And actually I found a way. Let's see how that is possible. So first, looking at the cloud side, we start again with our AWS testing environment, and we deploy our order service stack. And this is not just the order service stack, it's Anaïs order service stack. It's my own specific environment that I can spin up in the test environment. So my colleague Ray can also deploy his order service stack in the test environment. So in that way, you can isolate your stack or part of your environment, actually. Then what I did was retrieve the endpoint, the configuration of this deployed stack, and set it as an environment variable in my test run. And when I have all of this, I can actually locally invoke my create order lambda. So test my lambda locally, but test the integration with my order service stack in the cloud with the order table, for example. So locally testing our lambda, testing the real integration with the cloud. Best of both worlds, right? So I couldn't wait to show my proof of concept to the developers. And to my surprise, they weren't actually that excited as me. Why not? They said, yeah, it's all nice, but testing the integration with the cloud is not our highest priority. Why not? So this best of both worlds idea strategy that I showed you is actually based on the assumption that an architecture contains thin lambdas, or lambdas with not a lot of logic. So just some input-output logic, maybe one or two calculations, and that's it. And the biggest complexity is within the cloud. So the focus of this strategy is to test the integration with the cloud. However, this assumption of thin lambdas actually doesn't really apply for our context. We have now thin lambdas, we have thick lambdas, we have lots of logic in our lambdas, which means that highest priority is not testing the integration with the cloud, but actually testing the integration within our lambdas. And how thick are our lambdas actually? I will just give you a small preview of how our create lambda actually looks like. I won't go through it, like I just want to show the complexity of it. Every color block here is a unit or is a class, and every circle is an integration with another service or table or SNS topic. So it's quite complex. So actually, instead of testing integration with other services, we want to test the integration within our lambda. So we want to do this in isolation, right? So no integration with the cloud. And we can do this by intercepting the calls to external dependencies like this order table. And we can do that using a tool similar to WireMock, and it is called Knock for a Node.js backend. And we can intercept the calls, verify these incoming calls, and also simulate mocked responses so that we can test the integration, the integration within the lambda. And every call to like a DynamoDB or an SNS event ultimately boils down to an HTTP call, so we can just intercept everything with Knock. So my deepest wish came true after all. We can do local testing and mocking, all great. So now we zoomed into like the AWS Lambda, how to test it on different levels. But how can we test other services, especially an inception service like AWS Step Functions? Let's take a look. So AWS Step Functions is used to build serverless workflows. And if we look at the order flow that I took as an example earlier, when an order is created, at some point it has to be communicated over one or more channels like an email or WhatsApp or an SMS. And that's where the AWS Step Functions comes in. What is this inception of an AWS service? Each step in an AWS step function can perform a variety of functions using other AWS services like a Lambda function, for example, or an SNS topic. And the result of every step defines the path of the workflow. And if you look at the example, it can be quite overwhelming. A lot of things going on, lots of flows. But you can see like there are multiple paths here. There is some parallel execution in the pink side, and it can happen simultaneously or just one flow. And I highlighted one flow here where the order confirmation has to be sent via WhatsApp, and that happens successfully. And like this picture actually characterizes the complexity of AWS step functions. So what do we want to test here? Exactly this complexity. So we talk about different possible paths of the workflow. We have parallel execution here with flows. We also talk about error flows, error handling, which can occur in multiple places. So you have to define the test cases based on the likelihood and the impact of these errors. And every step in a step function can be configured to retry on failure. So that's also something that we want to test. And at the end of the highlighted scenario here, the message is sent to the WhatsApp, for example, and that's one of the side effects of such a step function flow that you want to test. So how did we actually test this? For starters, the only way known within our team was to do this manually. So what did we had to do? We had to deploy our application on the test environment. We had to go to the AWS console, which is a GUI to find and manage our cloud services in AWS. Then we have to manually start execution with an event that triggers the step function. So it all took quite some effort to test this. And if we came to this point, we also had to find the right input to trigger the right workflow. And especially for error flows, it's quite difficult to simulate. Sometimes you have to like hack some services, turn them off in order to test some flows. So all quite difficult. Is there any way to automate this? And I start chasing a rainbow again to my preferable way, which is local testing and with mocking in place. And I actually found a rainbow with the name AWS Step Functions Local written all over it. And AWS Step Functions Local is a downloadable version of Step Functions. It is an emulator which enables the possibility to run and test step function locally via Docker container. And I use this to create a couple of tests for the team, and I will describe in high level what happens so you get a bit of an idea how it works. So first we have to start a Docker client, and I actually used Docker Desktop before, but now not anymore. I use Rancher because Docker Desktop has a price on it for now. So Rancher, then we have just as our test runner, and before running all of our tests, we start a Docker container programmatically using test containers. And within that Docker container, we already mount a mock file. And within that container, we have to start an AWS step function based on the application. And then we have everything set up to run the test case, which is triggering this step function based on an event. And then when the execution of the test, the step function is finished, we can retrieve the state and the output to do our assertions on. And yeah, it's already quite difficult, but this is like the high level overview. If you want to know more, I wrote a detailed blog about it on choco.com. So there are, in hindsight, some benefits and limitations that I would like to share about these AWS step function local tests in working together with mocks. And all of those benefits are related to local testing and mocking. We have full control over the AWS step functions. We get fast feedback. It's easy to add mocks or tests, but there are obviously some trade-offs. You might already see like the complexity, the handful of tools needed to set up and actually execute this test. And with every tool added, this also means that the developer experience is decreasing. Mocking can actually be quite tricky. One typo in mocking file can lead to an error, which can be hard to debug. And at the end, we have no guarantee that it works in the cloud, because subtle changes between like the emulated version and the real version, right? But there is actually a way to reuse this test and do the same thing as what I showed you earlier with the Lambda, like having this best of both worlds strategy. Locally testing your step functions, but then connecting with external dependencies on a stack that you deployed yourself. So it's a similar strategy that can be applied. And again, best of both worlds, not something that we do at this point, but something that I learned along the way. And one of the recommendations that I want to give, if you really want to dive more in like nitty-gritty details of testing specific services, I can definitely recommend Jan's school with the URL mentioned here. So a little shout out. And like coming to the end of my story, you've seen lots of rainbows throughout all of the slides. I chased quite some rainbows, and it's time for some learnings that I had in hindsight. And everything was quite a big change for me, like coming from big corporations, going to a startup where everything goes so quickly, and like you go on a holiday for 2 weeks, you come back, everything changed, really, every time again. So you really have to be flexible. You have to be really, really agile as well. And it's really necessary here to prioritize. What is the risk? What is the effort? Try to do like small iterations, see what the added value is. It's like working agile, right? But then like as a QA mindset. It can be quite overwhelming. Just make your decisions and prioritize it. And beware for experience bias. I've mentioned local testing and mocking throughout the whole presentation, and that was like really instilled in me through like all of the experience that I had with the different companies and customers, but it didn't always help in my quest in this startup serverless environment that I'm now in, because you're so used to like local testing and mocking everything that you like immediately focus on that, while there might be other ways as well to better do the QA and to have better results in doing QA. So get this fine balance. Just use your experience, but also take a step back. And at the end, context is everything. There can be some common strategies found on the internet, but it's always based on like some assumed architecture with the complexity anywhere. And the context can be so different that it can impact the whole QA and test automation strategy. So it's really important to understand your context, understand what is actually going like what is happening in the code. The picture that you saw from Create or the Lambda, it's something that I like I created that flow based on like going through the code. So you really have to understand it to get the best view of how to apply QA and test automation on that. So collaborate with developers, do research, get fast feedback, and iterate and just tweak until you get the best suitable solution, just like Bruce Lee. And it's always good to take a step back sometime, step from the rainbow that you're on to some other view. And if you are high enough, you can spot the rare circular rainbow, which is the ultimate feedback that we all want to achieve, right? Thank you so much. It's time for some Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anaïs. Really appreciate your time and greatly put together all the points. Now, after the presentation and everything, our audience is quite pumped up. They have a few questions for you. So I'm going to be presenting a few questions that they might have. Now, one question that we have, as you can see, all of you can see on the screen, how do you balance the need for rapid development with maintaining a robust testing regimen, especially in the context of serverless applications?
Yeah. Yeah, what I said at the end. So for me, everything was new. I was used to Java Spring Boot applications. So I had some experience with TypeScript and Node, not a lot. So I really had to dive in, do the research. And I think what really helped me is to actually dive in, just not learn too much from the internet, but dive in the code yourself. Get help from developers if you need it. And if you like show your interest, they're really happy to help you answer your questions. And they also want to get fast feedback and like do a faster development cycle and not like deploying any bugs on production, right? So I think that's definitely one of the balancing acts that you have to do. Get fast feedback on the solutions that you find. Sometimes I have the tendency to like be in this tunnel vision that you have like your solution like right in front of you and just want to work and get it done and like you believe in it, and then you get some feedback from other people saying, oh no, this is not what we need. We need something different. So don't be too long in the tunnel. Just do your thing. Maybe just do a sketch or talk about your ideas with developers, with other people that might give like good feedback. And yeah, I think that really helps to keep the balance.
Greatly put together. And another question that we have is, how can we handle end-to-end testing of serverless applications that involve multiple AWS services? What are your thoughts on that?
End-to-end testing. It's always the question, what do you mean by end-to-end, right? So the end-to-end test that I talked about within our backend started with a GraphQL query or mutation coming from the front end, but then going through multiple services. And what we had like different versions of our end-to-end test. So when I started at Choco, they had a smoke test set with some end-to-end test, and it's like they tested the whole order flow from start to end. So it starts with some GraphQL mutation, but it's touched like 10 different services, and it was so flaky due to like all the dependencies and all the asynchronous processes that are like happening over there. It's really difficult to maintain such a thing. And what really helped us to get a bit of more, to be a bit more in control of our end-to-end test is to scope these end-to-end tests more. It might go over multiple services, but maybe focus on one asynchronous flow. What we also did was, for example, start with one service, with one flow, and then assert on the output of that service. So, for example, for create order, it goes through the whole flow, and then test the output like SNS events. But as I said, everything is under active development. So now we really want to focus on these integration tests, these Lambda integration tests that I showed you. So I think like starting shift left, cover with unit and integration test what you can, and then what is left with end-to-end, see how you can do it, or maybe you can do something like Datadog synthetic monitoring to do some end-to-end, some quick checks. Yeah, it's a whole story. It depends on the context, right?
Amazing, amazing, Anaïs. Another question, and this is something that many people are curious to know about. Now, how do you think AI will change the way we use cloud services and general testing? Has been a very hot topic these days. So would want to hear your thoughts, Anaïs. What do you think?
Yeah. So actually, I've been using AI for a couple of months now, and Choco is quite a fast-paced company that really wants to be on this AI train, so to say. So we did this hackathon. Never done something with AI before that, or not a lot, some ChatGPT, but that's it. So there's one big thing that we actually did with this hackathon. We are using Slack as our messaging channel, and all the bugs that are coming from the users are coming in through Slack. And we have like this Slack workflow for created for that. And there was also always one bug duty officer that with every incoming bug, he or she had to assign the bug to the right team. And it's something that we all know, right? It's like one person from one team has to like go back and forth maybe to different kinds of teams. And we thought with this hackathon, what if we can automate this? What if we can like create some automatic assignment based on both the bug report and the context of all the teams, which a team has to be assigned, and then like assign it, and then hopefully save a lot of time with this bug duty officer thing. And actually, we had the third place during the hackathon, and it was a solution we further expanded on, and it's actually now working in production. So we are using this automatic assignment, tagging the team in the thread of the bug. And yeah, it's actually working quite well. Accuracy is around 85% now, and sometimes I have to tweak some things, but it's really cool to work with it. And I'm planning to do a blog or maybe a next presentation about it. So that's one thing that really helps me, and I think AI can also definitely help us create tests. For example, GitHub Copilot is something that I'm already using. There is this GitHub Copilot chat where you can select code and say, "Oh, create a test for me." So I think there are some different aspects where AI can help do better or do quicker QA, but we still have to use our own minds to determine what the quality is of these tests, right? So that's also a pitfall that I see.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll all be looking forward to the next presentation or the next vlog that you might be coming up with. Now, another important question. With so much mocking, how much of the application are you really testing? What about maintainability of mocks and everything? What do you think?
So many mocks. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. I think it all depends at the end where the complexity in our application is. So what we really see, at least in our backend, is a big complexity within our lambdas, and we've seen like some bugs happening in those lambdas, but also a bit in the contracts between our lambdas and other lambdas. So that's something that we are now focusing on, and that's actually something that we can cover with this Lambda integration test, so to say. and actually intercepting and mocking these requests help to enforce the contract as well between the different lambdas. And I think the maintainability is something that we really need to see how that will be. But how I foresee it is that we will be sharing these mocks in we have a whole backend mono repo with all the small services in there that we can deploy separately. And we want to create one shared library of all the mocks where also the whole truth is of the mocks and the contracts between the lambdas. So I think that will definitely help with the maintainability as well, because it's the one point of truth. But yeah, I can definitely see the concern about the maintainability of mocks, because I've seen it in the front end with small integration tests where everything has to be mocked and it's really verbose and they have to change everything with small changes. So I see the pain. There are also some auto-mocking tools available, but everything has its pros and cons, because that also, again, decreases the transparency of the dependencies that a piece of code actually has. So there's not one answer. I can talk another hour about this, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anaïs. One last question before we wrap this session up, and I think this would be quite interesting. Do you retest the Lambda services after they're deployed out of the test environment to live? If you mentioned it and I missed it, apologize for that.
Okay, so after the Lambda services are deployed, are they again retested? Yeah, so there is still a manual testing effort that we see within the teams, especially now I'm really focused on backend changes, right? And we still have this gap between unit and end-to-end test, and I just literally finalized this solution that I just showed you. So we are really it's still in the POC phase. We need to bring this in a shared library and adapt this within the team. So due to this missing link that we have, there's still this manual testing effort where everything is tested on the test environment, but also on the staging environment. And we also have some Cypress tests for the front end that are still going end to end, also testing the backend. So for now we have that in place, but if we have sufficient coverage with this integration test, then I definitely see a decrease in all of those manual efforts. Maybe what I mentioned, some Datadog synthetic tests, some end-to-end tests to just make sure that everything goes well, and that's it. But we really are shifting left here, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Anaïs. Thank you so much for all the answers and everything. I think we have been answering a lot of questions. In case any of the attendees drop midway, you'll be able to rewatch the entire session from the Testmu event by going to the schedule. Also, if there are any questions that were unanswered, you can always go to the Lambda Test community and post your questions over there. We've dropped the link in the chat. If you have any questions for Anaïs, feel free to drop all those questions over there. And I really appreciate your time, Anaïs. Thank you so much for all the information that you presented to all of us. And yeah, to all the attendees, Anaïs, happy testing and have a good day, guys. Have a great day. Thank you so much, Anaïs.
Thank you too. And also feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you are really struggling with something. Happy to help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anaïs. Thank you.